pick up one of our classic 3.5-inch Velcro PVC patches now featuring the Typhoon to help support the channel via the link in the description below. Thank you and enjoy.
So let's get on to the MiG-23. The MiG-23 is probably in my top 3 aircraft of all time. I absolutely love it. So can you talk us through the 23 on the squadron? Was it the same role, or did it have a different role compared to the MiG-21?
Great question again. MiG-23, it's interesting. It's one of your top 3. I guess it's a fascinating airplane because it's a very complex jet. Mm-hmm. But to get to the core of your question, the same role, again, our charter in the Red Eagles was we have these Soviet aircraft. And while intelligence can tell us what they think the Soviets or North Koreans or any other country may fly how they may fly the airplane, all we knew as American fighter pilots is let's fly this airplane to the maximum of its capability. So, because we can't tell how the Soviets would fly it or North Koreans or anybody for that matter. So we're going to do what American fighter pilots do best. Let's fly the crap out of this airplane and show them the worst case MiG-21 or MiG-23 they're likely ever going to see. So that's what we did. So the roles were the same, although in practical applications, the MiG-23 had a lot less capability in the air-to-air role than the MiG-21. Now, let's go back a little bit. When I checked out in MiG-23, it was about a 1-week transition. One Thursday, I took my last flight in MiG-21. The next Thursday, I'm flying a MiG-23, a much more complex airplane. Checkout was similar. Hey, here's your instructor. Here's your flight manual. Here's your checklist. Go sit in that airplane over there for the next 4 days. Learn everything you need to do. And then we're going to go through some start sequences, slow speed, high speed taxi. And the next day, you're airborne for the first time in this variable geometry swing wing fighter that goes like a raped ape. So that's how the checkout went. Very similar. You learn to fly it. Although the MiG-23, getting back to your question, is same role how we flew it, but how we approach it. Those of us who flew the MiG-23, not all did, is your approach to flying it was just different than the MiG-21. MiG-21 was, as I said, a simple, easy-to-fly fighter. You couldn't really get yourself into trouble in the MiG-21. You had to work at it to really do it. Once you got used to it, very simple fighter, and you could wring that airplane out, pull the stick back at almost any airspeed, run it out of airspeed, roll off, no nasty departure characteristics. Great airplane, simple, very just like coming out of the F-5. Going to the MiG-23 was 180 degrees out. It was just the opposite. You had to be very careful with it. I'd say careful. I'd say be respectful of what it could and couldn't do. Now, unlike the MiG-21, the MiG-23 had quite limited angle attack parameters where you could fly it in. If you exceeded those parameters, exceeded your allowable AOA in any of the various wing positions, you're likely to depart the airplane, and if you pressed it even further and didn't recover, you're going to end up in a spin. And you really don't want to put any airplane in a spin, much less a MiG-21 where you only have one motor. So to get a little bit ahead of myself, I never did that. I flew it right up to the edge where it was almost ready to depart, but I never exceeded that. So, but yeah, going from the MiG-21 to MiG-23, so a lot more attention to how you flew it. And consequently, because it wasn't a slow-speed, agile fighter, when we went up against, say, an F-15, F-16, Tomcat, or Hornet, we never put the MiG-23 out front defensive because it wasn't even a challenge.
Yeah.
So if you were flying your F-15, for instance, and I was in the attacking MiG-23, you were always going to be out front because I would always say and tell the people I flew against, if you can see the MiG-23, you can defeat it. Because if he's inside of, 3, 4, 5,000 feet, even 9,000 feet, you see him, you put a hard turn out of plane with him, you're going to defeat it because he doesn't have the agility or the angle of attack capability to try to get inside your turn circle and gun you. Just not going to be able to do it. Now, he may get off a fleeting high angle shot as he's passing through, but after that, that's all he's got. And if you see him, you can get out of plane, you'll defeat him because his visibility looking forward is such, and his roll rate is such that you're going to be able to defeat him. So that's how we flew the airplane. Now, the one thing it did very, very well, unlike and better than any airplane I ever flew, is it was an extremely fast airplane. And not just by a little, by a lot. And when they say, other airplanes will say, well, an F-Phantom and F-15 or, Mach 2 plus airplane. Well, in under ideal conditions, yes, they are. The MiG-23, I had it at 2.35 and still accelerating. Jesus. Now, that was the placard limit. Yeah, they said, don't exceed that. And I go, 2.35 is fast enough for me. I saw that on two separate occasions, but it was not thrust limit. It would have kept going. And then on the deck, in high desert, and the high desert up at Tonopah was about 5,500 feet MSL. It was ground level up there. I had it on the deck, probably 100, 200 feet off the deck, 830 knots indicated, and still accelerating. A friend of mine had it, I think he was close to almost 900 knots in the airplane. And he did that by mistake, not on purpose. So the airplane, but that's moving. You're thinking about it. You're going at that airspeed. He's doing a mile every 4 seconds. He's moving. So, but that's all it did well. But it was very stable, down low on the deck. I mean, I was 830 knots and thinking, man, this airplane's like it's on rails. I mean, it's just dead, solid, steady. But again, it's all it did well. So it was an impressive airplane to see, both on the ground and airborne. And the one thing on the ground, it actually looks pretty large. But you get airborne, the airplane, the wingspan was only about 4 feet wider than a MiG-21. So when you had the wings swept all the way back and you're nose on to him and he's going away from you, and all you can see is his big afterburner, you go, man, that's not a very big airplane. If it weren't for the afterburner, he'd almost disappear. And it wouldn't take him long to do that. So I was once on the wing of a squadron mate who was in a MiG-23, and we got snapped to a pair of F-111s who were egress, and we were trying to intercept. And he lit that thing up, and I went with him, and I was in a MiG-21 on his wing. And I stayed with him till about 1.2 Mach, and at that point, he just disappeared. And I had heard about the MiG-23 for years from all my squadron mates who had been flying it, about how fast it was. But until I saw it do that, I wasn't a believer. I go, it can't be that fast. Boom. He disappeared. It was like, magician act. He's gone. I just pulled it out at 1.2. I go, why even waste the gas? I can't stay with him. I can't even see him anymore. Yeah.
But getting to like a bit of the nitty gritty here. So what was the cockpit like? And I'm guessing it was all manual sweep as well. Was it like what were the sweep ranges? Was it 16 to 72? Is that correct?
Yeah, full forward. You're exactly right, Mike. It was a full manual wing sweep mechanism. The control lever was just outboard of my left thigh, so just aft and down from the throttle. But it was full manual. You kind of push it down and pull the lever back. And detents were at 16, 45, and 72 degrees. And up in the upper right-hand corner of my instrument panel, right just down and low to the right of the heads-up display, was a wing sweep indicator. It would show you, what position your wings are at. And whenever it moved, it would also tell you your limited Mach number for that wing sweep position. The wings, assuming you had full hydraulics, which I didn't on one particular story, which we'll probably get into later, wing sweep movement was 3.1 degrees a second. Well, now I'm sure the viewers are asking, well, why would you remember something as arcane as 3.1 degrees? 3.1 degrees was, maybe it's totally coincidence, but it was the exact same wing movement as the F-111. Again, could be total coincidence, but that's what it was. That's if you had all your hydraulics going. Of course, you had some airspeed limitations. If you're going 700 plus knots, you try to move the wings full forward, doing 700, they're just not going to move, you know. So again, we had limitations for almost everything. You had to start slowing the airspeed, the airplane down to move the wings forward. He had to, he had G restrictions on the aircraft. So yeah, there was a lot more intensive, and you had to always be on the aircraft ahead of it and thinking about what configuration, what kind of G load, what kind of angle attack you were when you were flying that airplane, especially if you're fighting it against somebody and you had your heads out and looking around. You had to really be aware of all those parameters and what stage you were flying that airplane to avoid, one, exceeding your angle of attack, maybe departing the airplane, or, God forbid, spinning the airplane, which we had a number of people actually put the airplane into spins, which of all the instances they had, they all recovered except for one. And that happened, they lost a MiG-23 about a year and a half after I left the squadron. The pilot luckily got out. The ejection seat worked great. But anyway, so that was a little bit. But yeah, it was an interesting airplane to fly, to say the least.
Almost the way you describe it, and you describe the MiG-21, it almost feels like a step back coming from the MiG-21, even though it was a sort of, in quotes, leap forward.
Yeah, I'm sure McGoy and Gurvich, the design bureau, when they first started putting this thing on paper, and they thought, hey, we're going to make this airplane, we're going to give it variable geometry capability similar to the F-14, at least, in my simplistic way of thinking. That's probably how they approach it. Go, hey, these guys are let's make one of those too. Yeah, well, and they did know that the MiG-21, they had taken the MiG-21 as far as they could. They needed something that, one, had longer range, could carry a bigger radar, and more weapons load. So to do that, you're going to have to build a much bigger airplane. And so they did that. But in doing so, you're right. It was really, I'm sure for those pilots, just like we did when we left the MiG-21 and went to the MiG-23, the initial impression was, well, it's just not as much fun. Now it has, I can go a whole lot faster so I tell people, if you think of the MiG-23 as more of an interceptor than a fighter, then you're in the right mindset. So when you say fighter, you have this idea of you're going to turn, burn, get in the phone booth, really wrap it up. No, you don't do that with an interceptor. Interceptor, you go fast, get to altitude really quick, go run down a B-52 or a Vulcan bomb or something like that. But you're not going to turn with an F-15 or Tornado or whatever it might be. So yeah, I'm sure for those people who left the MiG-21 and frontal aviation in the Soviet Union and went to a MiG-23, I'm sure they thought, this isn't what I expected. I thought it was going to be a lot better than this.
So let's talk about a few of the aircraft you've flown against. I'm obsessed. Did you often go up against the F-14s in the MiG-23, and how did it compare? Obviously, both got wing sweep and that, and similar-ish roles. That was a bit more of an interceptor as well, the Tomcat. How did it fare?
Yeah, the Tomcat, great airplane. The biggest drawback on the F-14, and this is not to slight Grumman or the Navy, is early on the engines it had, TF-30s, it was kind of a finicky engine, especially at high angle of attack. Again, I get most of this from both flying against it and listening to my Navy squadron mates who had flown. Almost all of them had come from the F-14, so they taught me a lot about the F-14 engines and also radar capability. Good radar. You're out over the ocean looking for doing fleet defense, but again, it didn't have the hands-on throttle and stick capability that most other Western fourth generation fighters had. F-15, F-16, Hornet, all that. You had the guy in the back, which is great. You had your Rio in the back, good when you're doing fleet defense in the F-14. But you're in a turning and burning environment, that's probably not great. You really want to have, again, having gone to a single engine, a single seat fighter in the F-5 and the F-15 later on, that's really what you wanted. So the limitations to the F-14 were not an airframe limitation as much as the biggest one in a turning environment early on, because we never flew against the Tomcat 8 Plus or later on the Tomcat F-14D. Those were fielded later on. So I only flew against F-14As. And while it was a capable airplane, you get into the phone booth, slow speed against a MiG-21, just didn't have it against a MiG-23. They weren't even comparable. The F-14 was such a better airplane. Now, the only thing that the MiG-23 could do better than Tomcat was that high speed advantage. It could take off and walk away from a F-14, but that's the only thing it could do. So, and that's the same. I would say the same of every fourth generation fighter out there, because the MiG-23, as I alluded to earlier, we just never slowed down and turned with that airplane.
You must have went up against the F4 and the 23. That must have been a relatively fair fight, surely.
Well, not so much, because the F4, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you could see the MiG-23, you could defeat it. Now, the F4, you would love to get the MiG-23 into a slow speed fight, but no one flying the MiG-23 would ever slow down. But that'd be the one area where you would absolutely own that airplane. Now, you didn't have the high speed that the MiG-23 had, but the MiG-23, it was small, but not near as hard to keep track of as the MiG-21. Now, what the MiG-23 could do, and this is where it did pose a threat, is if you detected it as an F4 pilot back at your 7, 8 o'clock, whatever, attacking from, say, 9,000 feet, whatever, on in, you could surely defeat him with a nice hard turn. But if he elected to now blow through and separate, for you to either continue your two-circle fight in your, let's say in this case, left-hand turn, or reverse, try to go back single circle to pick him up, that airplane's going to be gone. I mean, he's going to be outside of 2-3 miles. Even if you were able to get a lock on with your radar and try to get off an AIM-7 missile, he's going to be out of range for even your missile at that point. So now the MiG-23, if he could somehow keep sight of you and pitch back and come back into the fight, now you're starting off almost neutral again. But that's going to be hard for the MiG-23 pilot to do, because not only is the MiG-23 small and hard to keep sight of, but as a pilot flying the MiG-23 in that scenario where I just went through and tried to extend out of the fight against a Phantom, to keep him in sight, to keep the Phantom in sight is a real chore, because the visibility in the MiG-23 was just atrocious, looking anywhere past your 3 or 9 o'clock aft. And that's why, the designers of the MiG-23 put that periscope right atop the canopy, because that was the only way I could see anything after my 3-9 line. And I could move my head around and look and see back at my 7 o'clock or my 4 o'clock, whatever it might be, and I could see exactly anybody right behind me. But even with that, to keep somebody in sight, if I had somebody right at my dead six, and I know he sees me, well, I'm not going to pitch back into him. Not with this airplane. I'm probably just going to pitch out of the fight. And I'm gone. I'm not coming back. So, yeah, it's for a Phantom pilot against a MiG-23. It's not going to be a challenge.
Well, let's talk a bit about the maintenance on the 23. I'm specifically thinking about the wing sweep. Was that? I mean, the engineers must have been amazing, but there must have been quite a lot of problems on the 23 just to keep that thing airworthy.
Yeah, it was. And just like the MiG-21 was such an easy airplane to fly, and likewise, the MiG-23 was just the opposite, so too was the maintenance on it. The MiG-23, MiG-21, pretty easy to maintain. MiG-23, a lot more maintenance intensive. And consequently, early on, the MiG-23 was not on the schedule near as much because they had so many maintenance issues with it. Early maintenance issues were, number one, with the engine, which they later on got around and they ended up getting that corrected. But the other thing, too, was because these airplanes, we flew them harder, as I alluded to earlier, probably harder than any MiG-23 anywhere in the world. And consequently, we put a lot of strain on them. Not only G-loads, had various wing sweep positions. And because of that, we found, our maintainers, were discovering cracks in the wing box, right where, because of the stress loads put on the wings and the wing sweep, the pivot points in the fuselage, we started developing hairline cracks in the wing box. And it took them a while to fix that. And I don't remember exactly what the fix was. I'm sure it had something to do with welding. But the airplane would be down for months to do that. And I think the most MiG-23s we had in a squadron were 10 at any one time. And they weren't all flyable at the same time. I think there was one I talked about earlier. We had one aircraft in a VIP hangar. And that was there forever because that was an aircraft that was never going to fly again. But it looked pretty sitting in the hangar, all prettied up and dolled up and spotless, but it was never going to fly. So really out of the 10, we probably had 9 flyers. And at any one time, I think the most I ever remember seeing on the schedule was 4 at any one time. So it just kind of gave you an idea of the complexity of maintaining that aircraft. Plus, it wasn't like you could just call down to your local parts warehouse and say, hey, I need this for a MiG-23. So to get those parts, so again, another clandestine effort to either go abroad to some willing country that had them. And then the challenge was, how do you get those parts out of the country without it being known? A lot of the maintenance that went on in the aircraft was, people, our maintainers they were really magicians, and it would be remiss of me to not really give them a shout out because they're really the ones that made this program a success. Without the maintenance guys that we had, we wouldn't have turned a wheel. So I was lucky my landings equaled my takeoffs. So every time I took off in the MiG, I brought it back, and not always without some issue with it, but I never once got into an airplane that I was really worried or anxious about. Never once, even in the MiG-23. Now, I'll probably getting off track here, but part of that is I was a single guy, no family, no responsibilities. Maybe I just threw caution to the wind and figured, heck, what could possibly go wrong? Well, but yeah, it was really a maintenance. I wouldn't say a nightmare, but it was a headache, that's for sure.
So before we wrap up the 23 part and move on to the book and some personal questions, can you share maybe a few stories from your time flying the MiG-23? And that can be in the air or just working with the guys on the ground?
Yeah, probably the one that's I'll point out right now, and it's devoted a whole chapter to it in the book. It was a compound emergency I had in the MiG-23. It was the first and only and they ever had in the MiG-23 up at Tonopah, and it was a main hydraulic system failure in it. And this happened after I was leading a 2-ship of MiGs, MiG-23 I was flying. My wingman, a guy by the name of Gary Craig, Goldie, was flying a MiG-21. We were up against a pair of F-15s. We are going to do a 2v2 intercept. And we're going to show them the F-15s, about a 40-mile range setup. We did some kind of Soviet high-low pincer attack. I was going low to the east in my MiG-23. Goldie was going high to the west in his MiG-21. I was accelerating 650 knots, wings back at 72 degrees, at about 15 miles coming back. Each of us, Goldie we're separated by 10 miles. He's up at 32,000 feet. I'm down at around 13,000 feet. I'm coming back based on our GCI call at about 15 miles, coming nose on to the F-15s. And as I'm in my turn, looking out the top of I'm in a right-hand turn, looking out the top of my canopy at MiG-23. My wings are back at 72 degrees, again, hauling ass, 650 knots. Could have gone faster, but that's what I recollect being at the time. A master caution light goes off in the airplane. And of course, that gets your attention anytime. So I immediately come in. I'm still in my turn, and I catch a glimpse, and I see the light, and then I go, okay, I know there's got to be a light on my tail light panel, my caution light panel, somewhere just above my right knee. So I look down real quick, and I see a brightly yellow illuminated warning light saying main hydraulics, which, other than your engine, is probably the one you don't want to see.
Yeah.
So I immediately knock it off. I roll out of my hard turn. I just remember rolling out the airplane, or rolling the airplane out, climbing immediately, and the immediate action for that, because it's I alluded to it earlier. The one thing when you got all your hydraulics working, the wings sweep at 3.1 degrees a second. Well, if you lose your main hydraulics, they're going to come forward at only half that rate, and only if your boost system continues to operate. So this is one of those emergency where the immediate action is, basically climb, get the wings full forward, because if you can't get your wings forward, you're going to punch out of the airplane. So for the listeners, I did all that, climbed it, converted all this airspeed, 650 knots, converted basically 400 of that to altitude, and I climbed, pull the throttle back to idle, because I knew to get the wings forward, I've got to lose a bunch of airspeed. And the one thing I want to have is I want to gain as much altitude as I can. So as I'm on my turn, throttle's back to idle, I'm climbing like a banshee, and I'm heading back toward the airfield, because I don't know, I'm not convinced I'm going to be able to bring this airplane back and land it, because no one's ever had this emergency before. So get all that. My wingman joins up on me a few minutes later. I'm now back at 250 knots, heading back toward the field. And as I'm slowing down, I've got the wing sweep lever full forward to get the wings. And I don't have I look down right in front of me on the lower pedestal in front of the stick. I've got two tiny little hydraulic gauges. And they're... Actually, it's one single gauge with both boost and hydraulic on it, or boost and main on it. And the main is gone. So all I have is boost, but that's still operating. But while I'm in my climb, the one thing I do have, again, I mentioned earlier, I can't see much of what's behind me. So your eyes, it doesn't take you long as a flogger pilot to get used to it. When you're looking around, the one thing you take into your cross-check all the time is you look right up into that periscope. So that's immediately while I'm in my climb, I look up and I look through that, and what I see on my left wing root, back of me, probably about 8-10 feet, is what appears at my left wing root is this, it looks like an angry cloud. It looks like a cotton ball attached to my wing. And what that is, it's hydraulic fluid from the main hydraulics escaping into the airstream, which again, I was doing 650 knots at the time, and it's just being atomized in that airspeed. So what normally would be kind of a reddish looking hydraulic fluid sort of looks like an angry gray cloud attached. It looks like a cotton ball attached to my wing root. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, now there's something you just never see. And so I look at that and I go, well, my wings are coming forward half the rate now, less than right at about 1.5 degrees a second. And I'm just sort of mentally doing the calculation. I go, well, I've got to get these wings all the way full forward. If I don't, I'm going to punch out, because even the MiG designer said, if you can't get the wings forward, there's no way you're going to land the airplane. So I'll save the listeners the details. You can read about it in the book. But I do get forward. We get the wings forward, get the gear down, I had to blow the gear down. I didn't have any leading or trailing edge flaps. And on the MiG-23, which a lot of people probably don't think about, you don't have ailerons. All you have is spoilers. So luckily I had that. And I did a controllability check, and the checklist called for, okay, if you get your gear down, you did a controllability check, your airspeed on final is going to be 210 knots. So don't slow down below that until you get ready to land. And then when you land, plan on touching down at 190 knots. So you think about that. Normal airspeed touching down in the MiG-23 was about 140. Mm-hmm. Your average airliner, probably, if you're on British Airways, you're coming in on an A380 or something like that, you're probably going to touch down about 140, 130, something like that, maybe a little less. Well, I've got a boatload of speed. So the airplane at that airspeed is still going to want to fly. But now you've got this squirrely airplane, which under normal conditions is a handful sometimes to land, because you got that narrow landing gear, you got those high wings, you don't have ailerons, you got spoilers, you're not incredibly, and now I've got I've got half the flight controls I normally have. So I landed it and touchdown, popped the drag chute, and the drag chute worked so good, I actually made an early turnoff. So, and there is, I leave the runway, there's a whole armada of fire trucks and maintenance guys there to meet me and shut the airplane down. And that was it, and days later, again, you can read about it in a book, but I'll tell you what happened to it. And had it occurred at any other time, I probably wouldn't have been able to recover the airplane. But I was lucky to bring it back as it was.
So we're going to talk about your book, American MiG Pilot. Tell us about this, where the idea came from. Did you always want to write it?
Well, in a word, no. It kind of started off, Mike, over the years. You leave the squadron. I left the Air Force after 14 years and went to the airlines. And like anytime you get around bars, and at the time, some things I could talk about, some things I couldn't. Later on, after 2006, once the program was declassified, I could talk more freely. And little by little, I'd start telling a few stories around the bar, or whatever people would ask me. And someone would say, that's a great story. You ought to write a book. And so little by little, I started jotting down a few things that I remembered. And that kind of was what started it. And from there led to, okay, let me see if I can write a chapter. And before you know it, I had 6 or 8 chapters written, but they weren't in order. There wasn't really any semblance or any concept of how do you really make a book out of this. So it wasn't until some years later, somebody seriously approached me and said, hey, you ought to really pursue this because I think it could go somewhere. So fast forward, I was contacted by Osprey Publishing, by an editor by the name of Tony Holmes. I'll give him a shout out. Great guy. And he said, can you put together a few of your chapters and give us an outline of what it might look like? So I sent that off. They apparently liked it. Wrote a contract some months later. And I'm embarrassed to say how many years ago that was. But it took me a better part of 10, 11 years to finish that book. And just last summer of 2025, I finished it. Went off some months later. Tony did an incredible job editing it, along with the rest of the team at Osprey. And ended up, I'll let you in on one thing. So it did fashion into a book. The original contract was for like 100,000 words. Well, I took that to mean 100,000 minimum. Well, it turned out to be about 150,000 words.
Wow.
In 366 pages, which I think startled them. Of course, at the time when I first wrote it, I thought, I don't know if I can write 80 pages. Well, anyway, so that's what happened. But yeah, it was never my intention early on to really write a book. But little by little, overcome by events, it just turned into one. And thus far, I think it's doing pretty well. And thanks to people like yourselves and some presentations around the country. I got one coming up in the UK later in April, and some other podcast. It's the book is out there. It will be released February 10th. And so that's how it came about.
Well, what was the clearance aspect like? Was that difficult?
No, not really. Now, I say that with a caveat. The caveat being, the program itself was declassified. I believe it was November of 2006. So some time ago, 19 years ago almost. And now there's certain facets of it that they weren't released, but in those intervening years, almost basically everything I've talked about in the book is all open source now. You can find it online. So I'm not giving away any secrets, any national secrets here in the book. Now, everything I talk about in the book, with 2 exceptions, and those of you who read the book will notice those, but everything in the book is something I witnessed firsthand. So it's not like, I heard this was said, or everything I was eyewitness to the encounter or the event. And the other thing that I have done that I'm actually pretty proud of is to add an air of authenticity to the book is I have gone back into my logbook and I can reconcile dates and times and events along with my Air Force records of exactly which airplane I was flying and tail numbers at that moment. So let's say I'm flying an F-15 or an F-4 or an F-5 throughout the book. In there will be the actual tail number and the date that I flew that event on that appears in the book. So, that's how it came about. And I figured the only way to do that was to go that extra mile and put that kind of information in. So people, for whatever reason, if they're historians or just aviation buff, if they want to look up that actual tail number, they can go, he's exactly right. That tail number was here in the 94th Attack Fighter Squad.
I think it was that one, but you've got the fact.
Yeah, I think it was really that one. So that's it. So that's a little bit about the methodology. And then also did in excess of 35 audio and video interviews of former squadron mates, both in the Red Eagles and other squadrons and maintenance guys. So, it was it became a labor of love really along the way. And as I got more into it, and thank God, as I told the publisher, that you're probably glad that I didn't crank this book out in just 2 years, because it wouldn't have been the book it became had I tried to knock it out that quick. Yeah, I'm sure you'll have a link to it, but for those of you who are interested in the book, you can go online at Amazon.com. You can get it in the UK. It's available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble here in the US, Osprey Publishing there in the UK. I think there's a few more notable online retailers that are carrying the book. So you can order it right now, and it'll be delivered, I think, here in the US. Amazon says they guarantee delivery by February 13th. So good deal, just in time for Valentine's for your lovely sweetheart. You can get her that book, and it'll be there for Valentine's. But so it's available, and then of course it's gonna they'll hit the bookstores, retailers, the brick and mortar kind of bookstores right there on the 10th. So that's how you can get it. And if you want, just go to any of those and just plug in my name, Rob Zettel, or the title of the book, American MiG Pilot. It'll come up, and you'll be able to. And it's also out on. It'll come, I believe, 2 days later on February 12th. Here in the U.S., the Audible book is coming out. So for those of you who want to listen to it, I was actually in the UK in London in the second week in December, holed up in the studio for 5 days recording the story. So if you want to listen to my lovely voice, it's also available in an Audible book.
Brilliant stuff. All the links will be in the description below, folks. But a couple of ones here to wrap up this interview, if you're happy with this,
Sure.
Z-Man. Do you have any hobbies?
Yeah, well, I do. I still fly. I've got my own airplane that I actually built. It's something called an AirCam. I'm sure for those of you who want to look that up, AIRCAM, AirCam. It's a twin engine. We actually have it on, say, an amphibious airplane. But took myself and my partner in the airplane, took us just under 2 years to build it. So I do fly a little bit here and there. Got it in our hangar down in Florida. So I take that out, and so I have that. The other things we'll love doing is my wife and I, we have a golden retriever whose call sign, by the way, his name is Miggs. So he's our pride and joy that he goes, because we have two homes, one up here in Annapolis, Maryland, where I'm at right now, and our other home is down in Florida. And they say, well, where's your home? And we tell them, well, wherever Miggs is at, that's where our home's at. So right now he's here in Annapolis with me, laying right down here, listening into this lovely interview. But that's it. So that's some traveling. My wife is a captain with American Airlines on the 787. So between her airline and my former airline, United Airlines, we enjoy a bit of traveling. So take advantage of some of those. So yeah, a lot of things are keeping me busy. And right now, this is actually a pretty big hobby, just marketing the book, being invited to sit down with somebody like yourself, Mike, and be a guest on podcasts and some speaking engagements throughout the country over the next several months, which are seems like not a single week goes by where I don't get 2 or 3 invites for appearances. So yeah, there's a lot to keep me busy. My wife tells me I'm flunking retirement. So yeah, I'm staying busy.
Always good. It's great to hear. I normally can have a good guess at this one, but I don't think I'm going to guess this one with you, Z-Man. Favorite aircraft you've flown?
Well, for fighters, I have flown. Now, checking out or actually being in an airplane or actually checking out is different. But for fighters, the 3 models of the F4. Basically, I tell people I've flown 5 different fighters, 13 different variants, anywhere from the F4, F5, F-15, MiG-21, MiG-23. So I've flown all those and qualified. I've flown in the F-111, F-16. I haven't been in any of the Navy F-14 or F-18s, but that's it for fighters. And then, of course, in my airline career, I was on the DC-10, A320, Boeing 777, and Boeing 757, and Boeing 67. I did that as a captain, wide-body captain for a number of years, and check pilot at United Airlines. For those of you who are interested in what I did after I left the Air Force, I spent 28 and a half years flying as a wide-body captain at United Airlines. That's it. I've been in things like Stearman's and some other aircraft, things, but that's pretty much the gist of it.
One you would like to fly either past or present?
I think any true fighter pilot would be lying if they didn't say they would have loved to have flown either the Spitfire or the Hurricane. So I would say either one of those, and throw in the P-51 Mustang, of course. But I guess if I could only fly one of those, I would say it would probably be the Spitfire. Nice. I think it's just kind of an iconic aircraft, Battle of Britain, all that. Although the Herc is right up there with her, So, yeah, that'd be one I would love to have flown.
But, just remind us where we can find you online. Do you have a website? Are you on social media or anything like that where we can follow you and see what you're up to?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll put a link on it. But for those who want to go on, my website is robzettel.com. And I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, a few other things in there. But if you go on to my website, robzettel.com, it'll bring you to the website, of course, and it's got a lot of drop-down menus, a lot of additional content in there, photos, things like that, and all the links to social media are on there as well. So you'll be able to click on there and go, oh, he's on, Facebook. Let's go ahead and click on it. It'll bring you right to my Facebook page. And you can follow along. And on the website, if you want to contact me, there's a link on there to contact Rob, and you can send me a message, an email, and I can get back to you. And I've had a number of people request, hey, how can I get a autographed copy of the book? So we can talk about that online like that, or, through that kind of messaging and that sort of thing. And I'm always happy to answer any questions about the book or even just experiences I had. So I love to hear from viewers and readers and, what they liked and didn't like about it. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Good stuff. Well, I'm wishing you all the best with the book. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing a bit about your story. It's been absolutely fascinating and brilliant to talk to you.
You're welcome, Mike. It was also, a pleasure to be here as your guest.